49. The doors were 15 feet tall and made of pale amber wood. Simon pushed them open with practiced ease and returned to the cart. As his gaze passed over Gryph, his eyes grew distant, almost glazed, as if he was no longer present, but just an automaton fulfilling a task. He pushed the cart into the room, and Gryph followed.
"Ah, Simon,"
said a voice that reminded Gryph of a kindly grandfather from a candy commercial he'd seen as a child.
"I was wondering where you'd gotten yourself to, lad. My guest is famished."
Gryph eased around the cart, muscles tensed for action. What awaited him was both stunning and expected. An old, white-haired man sat at one end of a long dining table. You know those tables you see in movies that rich folks use, the kind that circumvent any chance at real conversation? The elderly man, who Gryph guessed had to be Utserio, the Barrow King, looked at Gryph, and a smile that was both genuine and confused crossed his face. He reminded Gryph of his own grandfather, the last several years of his life. They were not the eyes of a soul-consuming revenant.
"Why, Simon, who is your friend?"
Simon said nothing as he pushed the cart forward. Gryph eyed Simon warily. Something wasn't right here. He backed away, but kept pace with the thin boy. As they fully entered the room, Gryph got his first look at the guest Utserio was entertaining. Wick sat at the table's far end, as healthy as Gryph had ever seen him. The gnome's skin looked as if he'd spent the last few months in the sun and not the dour darkness of the barrow. The blue shock of hair was lustrous and undamaged by acid. A jovial smile split his face. It was only when Gryph saw his friend's eyes that he realized something was very, very wrong. They were the eyes of the dead, listless and lacking light. Wick's gaze fell on Gryph, and the gnome said, "Hello." Ice dug into Gryph's veins. There was something going on here that he wasn't seeing. On a whim, he pulled Wick's goggles up over his eyes and toggled the lenses to see magic. He almost jumped. The place was rife with tendrils of all colors, moving to and fro. His head began to pound, just trying to differentiate between the strands. He closed his eyes and forced his mind to focus and to calm. When he opened them again, he centered his gaze on Wick. Sure enough, a silvery tendril of magic pulsed from Wick directly to the food Simon was serving Utserio. The old man pulled a tender bit of lamb free with his fork and shoved it past trembling lips, where he chewed. Each movement of his jaw brought a pulse of light into the strand leading from Wick to Utserio. Gryph's eyes widened. He was consuming Wick's soul. Gryph spun his spear around and dipped the tip into the stream, moving from the gnome to the old man. Maybe the spear's ability to store magic would interrupt the flow. The tip punctured the flow, and energy shot up the spear and into Gryph's body. Pain exploded into every cell in Gryph's body as he flew backwards, impacting the wall and knocking the wind from him. His health bar dropped by nearly a third. He stood, wobbling back and forth on unsteady legs. The old man continued to chew, and Simon continued to set more dishes in front of him.
"Simon, this is quite delicious," Utserio said. "I'm not sure I've ever had the like. What is it?
It's called gnome, sir, Simon said.
Gnome. Quite tasty. So tender and full of vitality.
Gryph shook his head, trying to clear away the cobwebs. He advanced on Simon and pushed the lad away from the serving cart. Then he tried to push the cart, get it as far away from this soul cannibal as possible. But his hands phased right through it. It was incorporeal. I don't like to be touched, Simon said as he stood, dusted himself off, and returned to his duties. Gryph panicked. Utserio was consuming more of Wick's soul, and it was taking a toll on his friend. His skin had turned sallow, and strands of gray had wormed their way through his hair. He rushed to his friend and tried to tear him away from the table, but his hands phased through as if Wick was not there. This close, he could hear his friend's wheezing breath. It was as if his lungs no longer inhaled enough oxygen to fuel him. Gryph turned and raised his spear. He poured mana into the spear, adding it to that stored in the weapon. The adamant tip glowed as bright as the noonday sun, and Gryph hurled it at Utserio with every ounce of strength he had. His aim was true, but the weapon passed harmlessly through the old man and hit the wall behind him. A cacophonous explosion tore outwards, smashing a massive hole in the wall. A breeze drifted into the chamber, bringing the sweet smell of spring with it. Utserio didn't seem to notice as he took another bite. This time it was some kind of custard. More pulses of Wick's soul oozed down the tendril with each cycle of the old man's jaw. Gryph rushed to Simon and grabbed the kid by the arm, tugging him backwards before he could deliver another dish to his soul-eating master. Let go! I told you I don't like being touched! Simon screamed, struggling to pull free of Gryph's grasp. But Gryph refused to let go. Fear dug into the boy's eyes, and tears streamed down his cheeks. How am I able to touch you, but not the others? Gryph screamed at the frightened boy. Simon said nothing, just tried harder and harder to pull away. How? Gryph screamed. Because I have no body! Simon screamed, and his eyes widened in realization. Gryph knew right then that until that very moment, Simon had forgotten this terrible truth. More tears poured down his face, and a cold calm came over the boy. I am stuck here because Morrigan gave me to him. Simon pointed an angry finger at Utserio. Gave me to him to be a sacrifice. I watched them experiment on me, slowly killing my body as they sought to understand my soul. Simon shook as the terrors of his past came rushing back. No, no, no. It is all my fault. It's because of me that Utserio and Morrigan understand how to feed on souls. I was the first. Gryph knelt and shook the boy. Listen to me, Simon. It is not your fault. They used you. They abused you. They murdered me, Simon said. But they did not consume my soul. They used me, to build this place. Simon walked over to the hole in the wall that Gryph's spear had made. A small smile came to his lips. This was my home. Long ago. It's why I made it again. I wanted to go back home. Gryph knelt by the boy, pain fighting against compassion at the thought of what he'd suffered. "How can I help?" Simon looked up at Gryph with sad eyes. "I do not know if you can, but I may be able to help you." He looked at Wick. "And your friend."
"How?"
Gryph said in a voice full of desperate need.
"You must kill me."